I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure what this video will end up being. Over the last few months, I've watched a number of those monthly reading wrap-ups that some YouTubers I watch have done, and I thought, why not do something a little similar? But I thought just doing what I've read or what I've watched, well, how will I choose between the two, or will I make two videos? That seems a bit complicated for a monthly wrap-up. So instead, what I've done is this, a peculiar arrangement of artifacts that represent my month, the merry month of May 2026, and the various odds and ends and films and books and other things that I have engaged with culturally. And although it doesn't include everything I've read or watched, it is a number of the, well, highlights of the month, if you will. Some of this is quite popular culture based, and some of this is more, well, if you want to make the distinction, high culture, but perhaps more heritage imbued culture rather than contemporary popular. That might be a nicer way to phrase it. But can you, dear viewer, already unpack my month? I suspect some of you will struggle with a number of the artifacts because while the books are self-evident and so's the film, the other little odds and ends, not so much. So let us begin with what I have read. At the beginning of the month, I finished reading, at long last, Star Wars: Heir to Empire by Timothy Zahn. Now this is the beginning of what I suppose you might call the original sequel trilogy. It follows Han, Luke and Leia after the Star Wars we know from the films. I believe it was published in the early 90s, and, well, it's an interesting setup, because you could say the original Star Wars trilogy is all about taking out the evil empire, and particularly the evil emperor, this terrifying sorcerer figure, if you will. But this is, at least at the beginning, much more about, okay, we've taken out the evil emperor, what now? So Han, Luke and Leia, they're no longer scrappy rebels taking out the evil empire. No, they have to actually think about how to structure the new republic, how to engage with other factions politically to make this multi-planet, intergalactic republic a working political entity that brings stability in the same way as the Empire brought stability, whether you like it or not. The villain of this, as you can see on the cover, is Grand Admiral Thrawn, who is this ingenious tactical figure. And what I particularly like is how he looks at the cultures and the artworks that different planets and civilization have made, and takes from this kind of the mindset of the peoples of that world, and from there he can work out how to deal with them if he has to, or even just control them. His basis for kind of his military thought is connected to his love of art, which is an interesting way to approach such a character as a Grand Admiral. So yes, it's the beginning of a trilogy, and I will get to the other books eventually. I'm not going straight onto them. I've got other things to read as well, but it is a fascinating avenue that Star Wars went down, and to me, frankly, this is far superior than the first installment of the sequel trilogy we got on screen, and that is mainly because it engages with ideas rather than just trying to create a spectacle that is nostalgically sort of fulfilling. This takes the characters, as I said, from their rebellious beginnings and thrusts them into the world of... Yes, as I said, it takes the characters of Han, Luke and Leia and it thrusts them into this much more political, much more scheming world of, well, power. They are now in power and they have to hold on to it and wield their power wisely. So that was Star Wars Heir to Empire. That was the first book I read this month. I think I finished it in the first week. And let's jump to more recently, in the last week or so. I read this one morning. It only takes about 90 minutes to get through. Super Frog Saves Tokyo by Haruki Murakami. Now this premise just drew me in. The idea that this person working at a bank who is in charge of an assistant chief in charge of collecting loans, and he comes home one day and finds a big frog waiting for him, asking him to help the frog save Tokyo. You see, there's a big earthquake coming caused by a worm, and this worm is underneath the bank branch where this assistant chief works. And together they have to, well, as I said, stop this worm from destroying Tokyo with an earthquake. The premise is a little daft in a way I kind of like, and it all wraps up quite quickly with no kind of padding. And the character of Frog, he likes just being called Frog, not Mr. Frog or Super Frog, just Frog, because he sort of embodies the essence of frogness, if you will. And he is very committed to the stopping of the earthquake, the defeating of Worm, but also he does it in a very polite manner, which I appreciate. So if you have an hour and a half to spare and you see a copy of this in a bookshop when you're out and about, I really would suggest picking it up. And this illustrated telling of the story is just a delightful way to read it. So far we've had Star Wars Heir to Empire and Super Frog Saves Tokyo. And I did consider doing a third book, but, well, the problem with that idea was I've got too many books on the go at the minute. I like having three. They are usually a fiction, a non-fiction, and a short story anthology. Sometimes as well essay anthologies, but usually a short story. And that's what I like. But at the moment, I think I have 2 short story anthologies, 3 fictions, and a further 2 non-fictions on the go. So I, in the coming month, want to wrap all those up. So instead of talking about a book that I haven't finished, I thought I would mention a poem that I came across. Yes, we are jumping around a lot here. Star Wars, Super Frog Saves Tokyo, and now Autumn by John Clare. It's not very seasonally appropriate. John Clare was a poet in the predominantly 1800s. He was born in 1793 and died in 1864. But this is his poem Autumn. As I said, not seasonally appropriate, considering this week that I'm recording, there's a heat wave at the end of May, so autumn is not on everyone's mind, but this poem struck me, and I've never read it before, so I wrote it down in my notebook where I like to write down quotes, and, well, let me read it to you. The thistledown's flying, though the winds are all still, on the green grass now lying, now mounting the hill. The spring from the fountain now boils like a pot, through stones past the counting, it bubbles red hot. The ground parched and cracked is like overbaked bread, the greensward all racked is bent, dried up and dead. The fallow fields glitter like water indeed, and gossamers twitter, flung from weed unto weed. Hilltops like hot iron glitter bright in the sun, and the rivers we're eyeing burn to gold as they run. Burning hot is the ground, liquid gold is the air. Whoever looks round sees eternity there. There was a number of elements that struck me when I first read this poem and listened to Richard Burton's reading of it as well. And that is firstly the word thistledown. I've always liked thistledown. That's the sort of like a dandelion, but on the end of a thistle, the hairy kind of seed pods that float in the wind. So the thistledown's flying. That opening to the poem, well, there's a certain almost whimsy to it. And oddly, I was driving in the countryside and I saw a little lane called Thistledown something or other, almost just a day or two after first reading this, and it was just a odd coincidence. I don't see the word thistledown much, you don't hear it much, but straight after this, well, there's a thistledown lane or some such that I passed by. Then there was just simply the imagery, the ground parched up like overbaked bread, the water boiling, the rivers we're eyeing burn to gold as they run. I like that use of the word eyeing, not looking at or other some such way to phrase looking at. The rivers we're eyeing burn to gold as they run. It's a beautiful way to phrase it, a turn of phrase. And similarly, the liquid gold is the air. You get quite autumnal colours in your mind. And then the closing, whoever looks around sees eternity there. There's a timelessness to it, and the quality of, well, autumn is, it's a month of decay, but also potential. The idea that this is an eternal cycle, so whoever looks around sees eternity there. I don't actually know much about John Clare. I think he might have died, or at least spent some time in a sanatorium. But having read Autumn, I wouldn't mind looking into more of his poetry at some point in the future. But yes, as I said, they're not seasonally appropriate at all, that one. But nonetheless, Star Wars Heir to Empire, Murakami's Super Frog Saves Tokyo, and John Clare's Autumn are three of the most striking things that I read this month. Now, what else do we have on this table? Well, you'll notice another book, Thomas Hardy's Under the Greenwood Tree. Now, this is on the table not because I've read it, but rather because this month I went to revisit in fact, the two Thomas Hardy houses just outside Dorchester. So you get the Thomas Hardy birthplace cottage, which is this beautiful little country cottage where he grew up and spent the first 30-odd years of his life. A thatched cottage that was built by his great-grandfather, and it embodies the sort of rural quality and the beautiful Dorset countryside that you expect from Thomas Hardy's books and his fictionalised county of Wessex. I bought this little book here, this Penguin edition of Under the Greenwood Tree, at the Thomas Hardy cottage, and shortly after that I drove a little ways up the road to Maxgate, the house he designed. It's often overlooked the fact that he was a trained and capable architect, and that makes Maxgate quite a unique building, as you go there visiting because of the great works of the author, Thomas Hardy, but it's not just about going to where he lived, but you really get a sense of him because he designed it. Now, the guides in both these properties are very informative, telling you about Thomas Hardy's life and also his difficulties. He had a very, let's say, troubled marriage or two marriages. So going to these places, you really do get an insight into his life, but also into the interests that he had besides writing. So at Maxgate, there are a couple of old stones from Stone Circle. Maxgate is built essentially on what was once a stone circle, and these stones are all based and placed around his garden, a few of them, a couple of them. I particularly liked in the entranceway of Maxgate, when you go into the sort of living room, the parlour, it has a list of kind of all the great writers of the era who came to visit Thomas Hardy at Maxgate, including T. Lawrence of Arabia. It also had people like H.G. Wells and, well, all the big names of the late Victorian and Edwardian era, really, coming to visit Thomas Hardy. And Thomas Hardy had a chair right by the fireplace where he liked to sit. And just seeing this comfortable little alcove, well, it's just a very homely way to think of a writer that I admire, although I will note I've only read two of his books. I've read Tess the D'Urbervilles and The Mayor of Casterbridge, some poetry, a few short stories, The Withered Arm comes to mind. That was a good short story. That was atmospheric and captured that. You get the rural quality with Thomas Hardy, but you also get an underlying kind of threat, a struggle, the struggle of rural life, not just the kind of picturesque idyll of the countryside. That's never what Thomas Hardy is about. But it's how these people navigate through their struggles that have made the works that I've read of his so powerful. I'll probably go on to, what have I got up here? Far from the Madding Crowd next, maybe. Or Under the Greenwood Tree. That would probably be the better option, as I've got it in my hand. So, yes, the reason I put this on my little table, Under the Greenwood Tree, is because I visited the two Thomas Hardy houses, both cared for by the National Trust, outside of Dorchester. So we've had a list of a few things I've read this month and a couple of places I've visited, which was also literary related. But what about the other things on the table? Clash of the Titans. Ray Harryhausen has always been one of my favourite filmmakers. Obviously, he's not a writer, director, filmmaker sort. He was a special effects artist. And Clash of the Titans was one of his final films. And it retells the story of Perseus with the creature effects you expect of a Ray Harryhausen film, particularly the Kraken and Medusa. Medusa's a real highlight of Clash of the Titans. And one thing I really like about Clash of the Titans, one of the things I like about it, other than Ray Harryhausen's effects, is the way it depicts the Greek gods. It shows them almost like a troubled family who are playing a board game. All human affairs are kind of a board game, and Zeus is this patriarch who is very strict about the rules but doesn't always stick to them himself. And almost whenever someone leaves the room, if you will, keeping with the board game analogy, someone else will move a couple of the pieces surreptitiously or do something that will affect the game. And then when the other player comes back into the room, there's a moment of, what are you doing? Why have you done this? Now we have to work around this complication. And yeah, they're just sort of like a squabbling family who have to humour this, well, Zeus. And I like that depiction of the gods. It's a fun way to take it. And that's one of the reasons I rewatched Clash of the Titans this month. One thing I did notice when rewatching Clash of the Titans, though, was that it really does, as a film, need a new 4K restoration from the original negatives. The colours really could be brought out far better and the image quality could be made a little crisper. Not too much. You like a little bit of grain, or at least I do. I don't know why I'm telling you what you like, but I like a little bit of grain in my film. I don't like it too smoothed out. But yes, it could just use a new restoration. So if any restoration team wants to embark upon that, well, I'll be buying a copy as soon as it's available. Now, next on the table, you'll notice, well, a toothbrush. Now, the reason I have this is because, well, I didn't have anything else to represent this with. It is the film available on Disney Plus and starring Brendan Fraser called Rental Family, which is about an American actor who lives in Japan and has been struggling to get roles in recent years, and his last successful one, or at least his last money earner, was an advert for some toothpaste, I think, or a toothbrush. I can't recall if it was for toothpaste or a toothbrush, but it was dentistry related. And that was his last real successful job, this advertisement, and now he is just jumping from bit part to bit part until he gets a call from his agent that, well, he ends up sitting in at a funeral that's not really a funeral. People have been hired essentially to put on a funeral for a person to make them feel like they've, I don't know, lived a worthwhile life and that people will miss them. And obviously there's the comedy to be drawn from this, but there's also the element, and you follow this with the Brendan Fraser character, him trying to work out what's the point of this rental family business? You go to family events pretending to be someone you're not to kind of impress the family. So one of the first jobs that Brendan Fraser gets is going to a wedding, being the groom, in fact, at a wedding where the bride actually has another lover. She's a lesbian and is going to live elsewhere. But she wants to put on this wedding to make her family think that she's marrying an American man, a Canadian man, actually, and is going to move abroad so as to sort of give her family what they want and free herself so she can live the life she wants. And yes, you slowly begin to understand why people would rent someone to be, for a few hours, a father, a friend, a groom, a colleague, whatever it is the person's acting, because once again, Brendan Fraser's character is an actor. And I think one of the key kind of points in it is this lady who works at the rental firm. She tells Brendan Fraser that sometimes you just need someone to look you in the eye and tell you you exist. This sense of being acknowledged is key to all this. The film is very much a slice of life kind of film, and I would say in places it felt a bit fragmentary. It could have been reworked a little to feel a little less kind of cut up here and there. And also the element of the surrogate emotions that come into it feels a bit, the theme begins to get a bit blurred when two of the main kind of jobs that Brendan Fraser's character has are to essentially fool someone. So one of them is he's pretending to be a music journalist to talk to a very old man who's obviously, let's say, going through a cognitive decline. And Brendan Fraser's character has to pretend to be this music journalist to kind of make him feel acknowledged. And another character is a young girl who he's been hired by her mother to be this girl's father, to pretend he's the father so that they can get through a school interview. And the fact that two of the key kind of interactions he's been hired to fool someone rather than hired because someone wants to feel acknowledged in of themselves, makes the film lose a bit of its thematic essence. At least I thought so. But this slight criticism is offset by the fact that the performances are just good all round, and it's just a sort of cosy, feel-good film. So the toothbrush, now you're looking at the table, the toothbrush represents rental family. Next is, well, I really didn't have anything to represent this one. It's a Chinese drama called The Heir, which is about a ink manufacturing family. It's only just started and I've watched the first dozen or so episodes. And while some of the family drama sort of is grating a bit, the performances, the costumes, the slow build of this story, I think it's going to be about 40 odd episodes, maybe more, I haven't checked. But I've been on a bit of a C-drama, not slump so much, but the last one that really grabbed me was Pursuit of Jade, a big sweeping historical one. That was a couple of months ago now, and none has quite grasped my attention so much since. The Heir has been interesting as sort of a prestige drama. It's not so high action and it's much more slow build. It's all about, as said, in ink manufacturing. We follow the granddaughter of, well, she's in, I think, the 8th branch of the family, which has been thrown out because of a wrongdoing that her father committed, not deliberately. He messed up the ink tribute that they had won. The family had won the ink tribute for the imperial family, and yes, he for various reasons. I imagine there's a little bit more to it that will come later in the series, I don't know. But because of this, her branch of the family has been exiled, but she wants to enter the ink industry herself, prove herself, and obviously she runs into a lot of trouble, firstly for being part of this branch of the family that have been thrown out, and also because she's a young woman going into industry and trade at a time when such things weren't so accepted. But yes, it's been an interesting series so far, and I'd like to see where it goes. Now, the two at the back, let's start with this one. I really didn't know how to represent this one visually. It's the K-drama The Wonderfools, which is a Netflix original K-drama set in the 1990s about a group of people who get contaminated by a substance and gain newfound powers. The main trio is this young woman who has a heart defect that essentially she expects to die and has known she's going to die young for a very long time, and she's a train wreck. People call her a train wreck, and her character is just she's very amusing, but also has a depth to her. You understand why she is so chaotic and why she's so dissatisfied with everything. At the beginning, because it's set in the 1990s, you're getting to the year 2000, so you get a touch of the Y2K, the end is nigh. And in the first episode, she gets upset because one of these preachers tells her that the world is going to end soon, but she knows she may not even reach that. She won't even get to witness the end of the world, which is unfair. And yes, her powers come to be teleportation, so she's bouncing about here and there. The other two main ones are a young man, her friend, who works at her grandmother's restaurant, and he has super strength, a classic. And finally, I don't know if you'd call him a friend, but another man, and she's the train wreck, he's just a kind of petty individual, and his skill is sticking to things, which it takes a while for that to actually come in handy, but when it does, it is very useful. So these three have superpowers, but obviously there's much more to it than that. There's other people with superpowers who have actual, control over them, and some of the powers are much more useful. Have I explained why I've got this? Well, Wonderfools, wool, the W from wonder, the ool from fool. I really didn't have anything to represent it. Should I apologise? No, I'm going to stick to it. This works. Wool, Wonderfools. Yeah, that's perfect. Well done. Me. But yes, I've watched that whole K-drama, and it's just all the characters, as I said, they're amusing, it's comedic, but there's also a bit of depth in there, and it's just an overall good time. Oddly, and this is the one I'm ending on, we've had Super Frog Save Tokyo, which I suppose you could fit into the superpower genre. Then you have the Wonderfools, again, superpower. And finally, not the Maltese Falcon, even though the Maltese Falcon is there. In between his talons, you'll see Spider-Man. And so that little diorama represents Spider-Noir, the new series on Amazon Prime, which stars Nicolas Cage as the noir version of Spider-Man. But this is an interesting approach to a superhero character, this series, because it, rather than feeling like a superhero franchise which has just been given a lens of noir, you can have the option of kind of a true hue, I think it's called, or black and white. Well, it's not just a filter of noir that's just stuck over the lens. This feels less like a superhero thing with a filter of noir than it does a noir series with a few characters that have superpowers in. And obviously some of the plot becomes this gangster figure wanting to control people with superpowers so he can threaten the mayor who's threatening his business. But yes, I admired how it very much felt like it captured some of the essence of what I like from noir films such as The Maltese Falcon, and Nicolas Cage is fantastic. Was he first the Spider-Noir version of the character in Into the Spider-Verse, I believe, and yes, he's just carried it on wonderfully, and this is a series I would like to see continued. So yes, that has been my month of May. We've had Star Wars Heir to Empire, Super Frog Saves Tokyo, Autumn by John Clare, a visit to the Thomas Hardy houses, Rental Family, represented by a toothbrush, and the sea drama The Heir, represented by the quill, which perhaps is the wrong hemisphere for ink-related subject matter, but I didn't have anything else to hand. Then Clash of the Titans, and the Wonderfools, Wonderful, and finally Spider-Noir. That has been my month of May 2026. I do not know if I will do any more of these wrap-up videos in the future. Please do comment below if you like the setup that I've made for this sort of wrap-up. It's a little different, I hope, than just... I really do enjoy the videos that I've seen other people make of what they've read that particular month or what they've watched that particular month, but I jump around so much that I read quite a lot, I watch a fair amount, so if I'm going to share these, I think I said cultural interactions near the start, then I might as well pick some highlights for the month and go from there. Some of them are represented by things that are a bit of a stretch logically, but I hope you'll forgive me for those. And yes, if you enjoyed this, like. If you are interested in me making more of these, please do consider subscribing if you feel so inclined. And yes, feedback in the comments would very much be appreciated for whether or not to continue this as a series of monthly wrap-ups. So, until my next video, and until next month, see you then. Wonderfools, wool, one, wool. No.